Hello, and welcome back to the series bringing the Spring Boot experience to Dart. Today, we're going to be talking about the chapter 2, which is meeting JetLeaf and running your first application. So, for the purpose of using JetLeaf to start building an application, the simplest way, just go to the jetleaf.hapnim.com website, go to the start building, which will open the builder, and you just create, like I said, you're building a task flow application. And as at the point of making this video, the only current version is 1.2.1, which uses the 3.9.0 Dart version. We are going to be including sample code so that we can run our first application. We're not going to be deploying, so we're going to be removing Docker, or we can just add it because of this series. Then you can choose any of these options, resource file properties, and here you get to see all the packages that JetLeaf has. So we're going to be using the JetLeaf web, the retry, the validation, the scheduling. I'm going to be using the resource. So let's preview the project. Now this is what the generator will give to us. So if you look at it, you have all the things you need. The project already done and ready for you to use. So let us generate the project. Once the project is generated, we get moving and open the project. So go ahead, open your project in your IDE. We are going to be using the VS Code, and the first thing we will need to do is to run Dart pub, so that's to get our dependencies initialized. And if you look at the pub spec, you see these are the JetLeaf packages we added. So JetLeaf DevTool is added for by default, which helps in doing things like proxy generation. It helps to do things like proxy generation and so many other things. So we have some errors we have to fix at the point of making this video. The changes that were pushed in version 1.2.1 didn't fix this, so we have to manually change it to, which has been changed to executable argument. So we just remove all these things because method argument doesn't exist anymore. So all we need to do is we just have to run this application to see its work. Now enable resource is added by default because we have the JetLeaf resource package in our platform in this project. Now scheduling is also added because we have the JetLeaf scheduling tool, but by default, if you don't have all those packages, this is just all you're going to see, the JetLeaf application annotation, which automatically adds a lot of things that needs to be done or that needs to be built on the application. As you can see, it has the auto configuration annotation, it has the configuration and annotation to add the JetLeaf application, and it imports the application auto configuration availability, which adds a lot of um, availability states to the application. And you have the import selector, which we use to be able to get packages and be able to get um, be able to read your code and every other thing that has to do with the code you build. Like I said, if you're coming from a Spring Boot background, all these things would be familiar to you. But if you're not coming from a Spring Boot background, then this would be new to you. So basically, you're going to run our code, and while running the code, you're going to be exploring the code as it runs, because like I said, running the code takes a little bit of time because it has to do some things in the background, which we are trying to make, trying to find ways to make it be as fast as possible. So while the code is running, we're just going to explore the JetLeaf application, and the Jet application is the class that handles the running of the application. A lot of things are going on here. You see your banner, and the banner is going to be printed on the code, and by default it uses the default banner. But if you want to change the banner, you can also change the banner. So this is the application.properties. If you had used YAML, it will come as a YAML file. If you had used so we're using .properties, and this is how we're able to define some certain things. We can change the name of this application here. And this is how we're also able to read environment variables into the properties file. If you don't want to read environment variables into these properties files, you can simply also use annotation to change what you are reading. So this is a Docker file that was generated for you, that is used in running your project when you deploy it to your server or anywhere else. Then, so going further, so this issue you are seeing here as the application runs, it's telling you that we have a generic class that has to be resolved, that you have to give us a hint so that we know how we're able to resolve it for you. Because of how that erases generic types in runtime, we also have to be able to resolve all the generic issues that we find in the application. So since we cannot resolve all of them, we require that you help us give some contribution to how we're going to resolve that. So what we just require to do is just add the generic class, the generic annotation, and you provide us with a class that has a generic issue, and all that will be solved the next time we run the application again. So while the application is warming up, like I said, it takes a bit of a time. We're just going to look at most of these things to understand how they run in the background. All these things are annotation, which don't really do much. As you can see here, they don't really provide much data, nothing else, just classes and classes and classes. But beneath all these things that you are seeing, a lot of things are going on at the moment with all these things you are seeing here. So the component scan is how we're able to know what components to scan, what annotations to put into the scanner. Okay, the application has started running. So this is how we now start making use of all these annotations. We need to know what components to scan, what components not to scan, what classes to include and what classes not to include. And the port name generator is how we're able to generate names for the ports we have in the registry, which can also be changed. You can provide us with default designs of all these things, but basically the JetLeaf application annotation is very important, because without it the application will not be able to run, because it is able to add all these things to the application, to provide us with all the things we need to scan the application, and also scan your other applications too. The JetLeaf run is what actually runs the application. As you can see, detects whether we're running with AOT. If it's running with AOT for now is not enabled, so it is going to just exit. But with time, we are going to build in the AOT support. So it runs a scan of your application, and then we now start building your application. Create a bootstrap context, register listeners, and then this is where you now start seeing application listeners running. You have on starting, build application context, make the application listeners know that, oh, the application is ready. And we have publishers who are able to publish events on the application. If you read through the code, you will see a lot more of things that are going on. Basically the goal was to make it possible that people coming from a Spring Boot background already understand what is happening and wouldn't have to start going through again to see what's happening. So if you're coming from a Spring Boot background, most of the things you are going to see are going to be familiar to you. Most of the structures are going to be familiar to you. If not, we would have gone a different route, but we wanted to make sure that people coming from a Spring Boot background finds it easier to navigate the framework without having to learn a new framework system again. So apart from that, so that's how most of the things you see here are going to look familiar to the Spring Boot design or structure. So this is how the banner is being printed. If you have a different banner, you can also provide that, and it will override the JetLeaf banner that you have by default. So basically the application is running. So let's go into the application and see what we can do. So the example code gives us a controller, so we can make a request in this application. As you can see, the REST controller is what we use to create web APIs. So it returns, it has that slash stores, and it has 2 endpoints. Now you don't need to follow all these things. You can basically write your controller anywhere. You don't have to put it in one particular folder or anything at all. So let's run the application and see what happens. Okay, so you see we're able to get the ID hello and name example store, which this gives to us directly. So if you want to make as you can see, we just send in the ID and is able to take your Dart object and return it to us as a JSON response. That's simply because behind the hood we have a lot of converters that are happening underneath what is happening right now. So that's where JSON comes into play. The JSON package is built in to the JetLeaf web. So when you run the application, the Jetson package has what's it called Jetson to HTTP converter, which takes your data object, converts it to JSON, and then returns it to the web in JSON response. If we dive into this, let us dive a little bit of it. We're not going to go much into it, but we're just going to look at the converter. So you see a lot of converters here. You see the Jetson to HTTP message converter, to XML to YAML. This is how it's able to take your data object and convert it to JSON. As of now, we're using the JSON mapper. So obviously, if we inspect, you see that it is actually using the JSON mapper right now to map your data. But all these things can also be changed, and by just using annotations, we can swap all these things. You feel like the JSON mapper is not really doing much for you, you can change all that. All these things would be explored as we move on to the application. Now we want to be able to run this application on, let's test the post method. Now you see all these things because I've already set it up so that I don't have to take much time in this episode. So we just need to make a post. Now the username is not really in the structure of this store application. If we look at it, so the store object doesn't have username. So let's see what happens if we add username to the response we make. It's not going to add that because it doesn't have that in his response, in his object. So it's definitely going to just ignore that, which this is made possible with the JSON mapper to make it possible that it ignores things that are not in the object. Now, if you don't want to ignore anything, you can actually make it possible that when somebody sends data that is not in the object, it throws an error. All these things are also possible through annotations. You can explore a lot of annotations like JSON ignore, JSON field, lots and lots and lots of all annotations that if you want to explore, you can just use to make that possible. Now, this is all I have to say about this. The goal of this was to make it possible for you to run your first application in JetLeaf using the builder. If you want to go through the hard route of creating that application, then importing the JetLeaf package into your application, then you can go through with that. Well, all the same, see you in the next episode.